Hello friends and lovers, my name's Haelian and I'm here to help you beat Hades 2 at a higher amount of fear from the Oath of the Unseen here. We're going to go over the different possible loadouts, mostly being from 8, 16, and 32 fear, because that's what you need to get Skelly's rewards. And we're going to talk about each individual vow as well, and kind of just discuss what we think of them, which ones are easier, which ones are harder, which you should avoid, which ones that are essentially free fear. I have beaten 32 fear across multiple weapons. I have beaten it on the dagger too there, but the testament was kind of buggy. It didn't appear until later on. But yeah, let's get started and just go over the individuals really quickly. All right, let's just quickly go down the line here for the different vows and what I think. So Vow of Blood, all foes deal 20, 60, or 100% more damage, and it goes 1, 2, 2. It's pretty okay up to 60%, I think, for 3 fear. I think 60% more damage for 3 fear is okay. It's certainly not fun, but I think it's workable. I think 20% for 1 fear is and at 100%, that's when things start to get really scary, but I don't know, you might have to do it at certain numbers, essentially. Vow of Dominance, all foes have 10, 20, or 30% more health. It's pretty frustrating to deal with worse enemies. It's 1 fear each. It does affect bosses too, so it's pretty scary. I don't have it on a lot. Usually I just have like 1 level on, if anything, if I do have to have it on, but I avoid it quite a bit so far. Vow of Rebuke, all foes have a barrier, 1 or 2 for 1 fear each. It's okay if you're using like somehow Scorch for the most part, like a lot of Scorch effects. If you have something that easily knocks it off, like Poseidon's splash effects on your attack or special, if you're abusing that a lot, it's pretty easy. I don't know if I'd call it free, because enemies don't get staggered when they have it on anyway. So it can be scary, but once you get to like 32, you might have to do it. Vow of Fury for 3 fear each, 20 or 40% faster enemies. God, at 40%, it's really scary. It really is. It takes a long time to get used to too, especially the Chronos fight. It's really difficult at 40% faster. 20% I think is quite manageable for a medium amount of fear there though. Vow of Suffering, I just hate this one, to be honest. I kind of just hate it. In each encounter, you take bonus damage the first time you're struck, so 100% the first time you take damage in each encounter. It just triggers so often, it feels, you know what I mean? It just triggers so often, and when you have it paired with something like Vow of Fury, it's like there's really so little you can do about it, it feels. And that's 2 fear for the first level, and then the second level, another 2 fear, 300% bonus damage. I would never touch that thing, really. That's actually how I beat 32 fear for the first time, but weirdly, I really don't think that was the right way for me to do it. I really don't like this one. I avoid it quite often. I'd almost rather have 2 levels of Vow of Blood than 1 level of Vow of Suffering. I don't know why. Maybe that's crazy though. Vow of Commotion, most encounters have more foes, 20, 40, 60% more, 1 fear each. For some reason this feels worse than Hades 1. It's the exact same thing. For some reason it just feels worse. I mean, Tight Deadline / Vow of Desperation, which we'll get to later, is essentially the same, but the runs are definitely longer. It's the deadline is tighter in this game. It's not as easy to just turn on the highest level of a Vow of Desperation and just clear it without having to think about it. I don't think it is, at least. So Vow of Commotion, I don't use it. I don't have it on often at all right now. Vow of Haunting, most slain foes have a 25 or 50% chance to become a Revenant. A Revenant, after 5 seconds, this becomes the foe it came from, unless you collect it first. So, and essentially, enemies have a chance to drop a soul. If you don't physically pick up the soul with Mel, then they will respawn after 5 seconds, become the exact same enemy with full health and everything. It's really annoying. However, it is still easier, as you can imagine, than, say, Vow of Commotion, which just strictly gives you more enemies. This, like, you'd get a couple more here and there. You might mess it up. Sometimes it gives you some frustrating situations, you know what I mean? It's a frustrating fear, but I feel like it's one that I have to have on very often myself. Vow of Wandering, most foes have a 10% chance to be from the next region for 1 fear, or a 25% chance for an extra 2 fear. So 3 fear for both levels of that is basically free. It's really not bad at all. It almost doesn't matter, and I don't notice it half the time. Easiest fear probably on the board right now for 3. So if that's where you're just starting, if you're just doing like the earliest testaments, Vow of Wandering is super easy to deal with. Vow of Scars, any healing effects are less effective, 75, 50%, and then 0% it jumps up. So it's 1, 1, and then 2 for the final level. I honestly have had an easier time running Vow of Scars at 100% here, or 0% I should say, than taking like the additional damage from other stuff. Weirdly, I don't know why, but yeah, we'll go over that later. But do I have, yeah, like 1 level is okay for pretty low amounts of fear, I think. Vow of Destitution, all items that cost gold are more expensive, 40% or 80% for 1 fear each. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's kind of just not fun to have on a lot of the times, right? Not being able to buy a lot of things from Charon's shops, it just kind of takes away some of the fun, you know? But sometimes you gotta have it on, right? Sometimes you gotta have it. This one's kind of medium. Like, yeah, I have it on fairly frequently. Vow of Panic, enter each location with less magic, 0% magic. It's either 100% or 0%. That's all you get. It's an interesting one. I almost never use it right now, besides at 32, in which case it feels like I have to have it on. Before that, I probably wouldn't have it most of the time, but it's probably not that bad. It just requires you to get a magic regen boon probably very early on in a run. And with some of these other future vows that we're going to look at here, that's going to be quite difficult. I never use it, essentially, unless I'm at 32. So I guess there's that thought about it. Vow of Forsaking. After you choose a boon, 2 unpicked blessings will not appear again this night, and that is for 2 fear. That's the only level to it. It's almost free. I mean, yeah, sure, it does banish the 2 things you didn't take in a boon window. Only boons, not hammers, by the way. But that's kind of just not that big of a deal. You're not usually seeking that many specific things from a specific god. Usually, if you are seeking something specific from a god, you're kind of being led to it from the first thing you took, if that makes any sense. Like if you take a splash boon from Poseidon, you probably want Slippery Slope after that so you can apply slip to enemies. There's no way it could have been in that first window if you didn't already have a splash boon from them though. So in other words, this is a very easy piece of fear, and I have it on most of the time if I'm doing just like 6 or more, you know? Vow of Bitterness, the first boon in each region becomes an onion instead. 3 fear for it. I'm kind of torn in this one. So you're basically giving up 4 boons in a run, right? There's really no way around it for 3 fear. I mean, it's not easy, that's for sure. It's the worst in region 1, obviously, because you're just like exceptionally weak before you get that first really important boon. You know what I mean? It's tough. This is one that I have tried to work with, and I feel like I've had rough runs with it every time. I think it doesn't sound as bad as it ends up playing out a lot of the times. 4 boons less per run is kind of a lot when you think about it. When you're probably only gonna get 6 to 8 boons on average already, right? That's tough. That's tough. So that paired with like Destitution and stuff means you're just getting so much less from the gods. Yeah, it's a tough one. Vow of Arrogance. Whenever you choose a boon, prime magic for each rarity greater than common. 5 for 1 heat, and then the second level jumps up to 3 fear. Sorry, I just called it heat. So 4 fear for both levels, and you prime 10 magic for each rarity greater than common. So if you take an epic boon, you have 20 primed magic the rest of the run. This one might be slightly buggy right now. I've had this thing where if you palm a boon that primed some magic because of this, after the fact, after you took it, obviously, then the prime just goes away. Don't ask me. Weird. It doesn't, I don't know why that would be intended, but yeah, very odd, right? So for 4 fear, though, this is pretty good. You do got to be careful of your rarities, but you can set up your Arcana cards so that you don't get super rare boons anyway, like rares and epics, etc. Dual boons cost 30 magic, by the way. Infusion boons don't cost anything. I'm actually not positive what a legendary costs. It's probably also 30 magic as well at the second rank here, at least. But yeah, this is a pretty easy one to deal with, surprisingly. But you just got to pay a lot more attention to the boons that you take, and you don't want to take just like totally random epics. And a lot of us, we get blindsided, right? Or we get kind of tunnel visioned. When we see an epic boon, even though we know it's not super useful right now, you just want to take it, right? Like we all do that. You can't do that with Vow of Arrogance on, that's for sure. Vow of Desperation. You have 9 minutes to fight through each region, 7 minutes, 5 minutes. It's gotten a lot harder since Hades 1. It's exactly the same. It's 1 heat, 1 fear for the 9 minutes, 3 fear for 7 minutes, 6 fear for 5 minutes. I actually don't run 5 minute right now. Maybe I'll get better and things will change over time. I don't usually use the 5 minute one though, honestly. Even at like pretty low amounts of fear, it's pretty scary. I usually almost always use 7. It's probably about time I graduate and try doing the 5 minute one. Maybe if your meta progression is practically done, 5 minutes is workable at that point. But yeah, I would probably stick to 7 minutes. It's not going to be easy, especially if you go to the surface. The surface is really hard on you here because the zones are quite long on the surface. They probably made them long on purpose since we only have 2 zones on the surface, right? So they probably made them longer than normal for now until they give us more zones, at which point they'll probably lower the length if I were to guess. All right, in Vow of Abandon, nullify the benefits of your Arcana cards. 5 fear, and you lose all your Arcana cards. I mean, you're not going to use this in a run for really any purpose. Like, that's kind of silly, I guess you could say. Like, that's just not going to happen. This is like the last vow you turn on all the time, basically. I don't know. I'm guessing. Like, if you're getting to 50 fear, this is the last one. That's going to be the only thing you don't have on, I think. I'm pretty sure 55 fear is the max fear, by the way. But yeah, there you go. There's all the vows. Don't touch that thing, by the way. All right, so for a simple 8 fear setup, Vow of Wandering, like I said, very, very simple, very easy. Probably 2 on Vow of Desperation. And start getting used to that now if you want to climb the fears, because you're gonna have to do it. And this isn't really gonna hurt your time much at all. Then you could probably do Vow of Forsaking. It's easy. You don't really got to think about these vows that hard. Desperation is the only one you got to keep in mind a little bit. You got to make sure you're taking the chambers that aren't gonna like cost you time. Like, you don't want to skip a mid shop in a zone to go fight some enemies when you don't have to. You know what I'm saying? So for 8 fear, this is a pretty good one. If you absolutely hate the deadline, then you could probably do Vow of Fury, I guess. Take 20% faster enemies, start getting used to that a little bit. Some people ask me pretty often, what if you just do no deadline and you just add a bunch of enemies to the game? I mean, all the power to you if you enjoy it, but basically making a run 60% longer, which is what's happening when you take that, it's painful for me to play the game that way. I don't enjoy it, to be quite honest. It's painful. I mean, and plus, the longer it takes to get rid of the enemies, the more damage you're going to take, and the more exhausted you're just going to be at the end of it. Meanwhile, you don't get any more enemies. You play the game the exact same way if you take Desperation when you think about it. But now you just, maybe your door choices are going to be slightly different, or you're just going to pay attention and make sure you don't leave the game idling randomly. But yeah, I think this is a good 8 fear setup for when you're just getting started to get that first statue. All right, and when we're bumping it up to 16, I think you have to take Vow of Fury at that point. And I think Vow of Arrogance is very easy. It's not exactly fun to have to turn on, but I think it's pretty easy to deal with. And then you get a lot of options because we're at 15 fear now. And you could probably change some things out here. I mean, one Destitution is easy, done, just call it a day, don't gotta think about it. You could do 1 Rebuke. You could do 1 Dominance, but I probably wouldn't do it. You could do 1 Haunting, but it's just annoying, and I'd probably rather do Destitution at that point. You could do 1 Vow of Blood instead. You could probably do one of a lot of these different things right here, essentially, instead of Destitution, but I guess if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Destitution. If you're struggling with something, you do got to think about Vow of Desperation here still when you're choosing this stuff, though. So if you're already struggling with the 7-minute timer, taking something like Haunting, Commotion, or Dominance could be rough, or Rebuke for that matter. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good 16 fear setup. I wouldn't really change too much about it, honestly. If you made me turn off Destitution, I'd probably turn on 1 Vow of Scars, I think is the only other thing I'd change right now. All right, and here's the big one. We gotta work our way up to 32 fear now. So we gotta take the second Destitution, no doubt about that. I'm gonna say, I think the best method is probably gonna do 100% zero healing. I know, hear me out on this though. We have to take Vow of Panic because I think you just don't have much of an option. You gotta take Double Revenant, not much of an option. Probably gotta take 2 Vows of Blood, that's 3 fear on its own. It's not, yeah, the best we can do basically. And I think Vow of Fury is sort of the way to go here as well. And then maybe Double Rebuke, but it does kind of depend what kind of build you're doing. Like if you're hoping to do a big axe swinging 32 fear build, this probably isn't going to feel good. If you're going to do whirlwind, it might be okay. It might depend on a few other things. Like if you get something like Demeter or Hestia's Cassid, that'll knock off rebuke really easily. But you need stuff like that, so you're going to have to think about that when you're in the run and how you're going to start the run off. I do think this is an okay 32 fear setup, and I know it's really scary. This is scarier than Hades 1 in my mind. There's a few things you could consider dropping here. First of all, 7 minutes shouldn't be too tight on this most of the time. The only thing that's really hurting the deadline here is Haunting. I mean, I guess there's Vow of Wandering, but not really. So it's really just Haunting that's hurting you. So you could try that at 5 minutes and then turn down Vow of Fury, but you got to be really, really careful. It's still going to be really hard. Sorry, Rebuke does hurt the deadline as well here. That's definitely going to feel it. I don't know if I'd recommend that. I think this is better when enemies are just not hitting us as hard. Now, this is actually how I beat 32 Fear for the first time, but I kind of regretted it the whole run when I had Vow of Suffering on at 1 level, and I had Healing at half effectiveness. I mean, I guess it worked for me, but it was quite close. It was quite close, and I didn't like Vow of Suffering, not one bit, but maybe I do need to play around with it a bit more. But yeah, I think these are basically my options. I mean, I guess you could consider something like Bitterness and try it out, and I guess I would probably take down the Fury again here, if anything, if I were to put on Bitterness. I think that's where I would go with it. It's kind of just about, do you do Fury or do you do something else kind of close to it? I think that's sort of the question. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good setup. So if you want to strip it down a little bit, maybe you would probably put something out kind of like this, and then you got to figure out where that last 7 fear needs to go, depending on your preferences a little bit. Just don't touch Abandon, I would say. Definitely don't touch the 2nd level of Suffering. I think there are ways to sort of negate this vow, but you need very specific boons. You know, there's some things that soak that first instance of damage when you enter a room. If you're able to get armor, there's an armor boon from Hephaestus that gives you armor every single chamber, but does prime some magic. That'll basically block that first hit. The armor will soak it and you won't get hit more than whatever the armor is. That's not bad. Demeter also has Winter Coat that blocks the first instance of damage. I don't know if that actually blocks the bonus damage you would take here, though, honestly. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But yeah, I hate that thing. So yeah, I guess you could try to gear up around that if you really wanted. But yeah, this is a pretty good setup for 25 fear, and you can kind of figure out what you want to do based on what I've said here. But yeah, let's talk about some specific builds, some specific weapons, now that we've kind of discussed the different setups here. Okay, and first, of course, we're going to have to cover the best build in the game probably right now. That is Aspect of Momus for the staff, so you get a bunch of special power and Omega special power. The heal actually doesn't really matter. You can actually use it. You can use the Omega Special Blast, and you will get healed even through the vow that disables healing, so that actually doesn't matter there. But yeah, the extra power that you get from the special is just incredibly powerful. It's incredibly important, and we'll go over what kind of boons you're going to want for it too there. Let's take a look at the Arcana cards, and I won't go over everything too detailed here. You can kind of take a glance and look at your own setup. I do have a video where we talk about it, but Strength is really important here. The Lovers is really important here. I don't have any boon rarity on. I just don't think it's super important. We don't have the Unseen on, don't need it. With no healing on, the Wayward Son doesn't do anything. I also don't have the Boatman on, which is the one that gives you gold, because with Vow of Destitution, it just feels even worse than usual. We still get 6 rolls with the way I have them upgraded, so I think this works pretty well here. I do have the Huntress on for this particular build, and yeah, that's just free damage right away. We don't really plan to use magic in this build at all. So yeah, I went ahead and did a whole run, and this is the exact fear setup that I used for this particular aspect. I actually hadn't done it before making this video, but I knew that this was the build or the weapon, the aspect to use if you want to really breeze through the game. So if you want to get it, this is a good way to get it, definitely. So yeah, we do have double Vow of Fury, and I do have the 5-minute deadline on it. I decided to give a shot. I completed the run with tons of time to spare. I had like 6 minutes still left on the timer, so it was pretty easy going. So this is a decent way to do it. You do still have 0 healing, but yeah, it was super easy, honestly. We'll talk about the actual build in a second here. But yeah, I just have one rebuke on because with the 5-minute deadline, it felt like I almost had some to spare. It was kind of that or, you know, Revenant, which makes the soul spawn. So just had to kind of pick between those two. But yeah, this is a pretty good setup, I think, at least for this particular build that we're going to go over. So the goal for this weapon and aspect is just to get Poseidon on the special. So go ahead and start with his Keepsake. The rarity isn't the most important thing ever. You just have to get Poseidon on the special. It helps knock off Rebuke super easily. You don't need to use the Omega at all. You don't really have to have enemies in your cast. Just start spamming the special button and you're gonna have a pretty good time. Poseidon's just optimal because the on-hit effect, you know, knocks off Rebuke, and it does quite a bit of damage. Also could lead into things like the Legendary and a few other really nice boons if you really want. Now, the ultimate goal really is to get the double Moonshot Hammer, which literally just doubles your specials. So you have 2 projectiles, which means you get 2 Poseidon triggers from every single special, and the specials now track enemies, and it's so easy. It is so easy. That's really all you need. I mean, you can get some other stuff. You definitely want to trigger Origination, so you're going to want more curses, so you can get Slippery Slope from Poseidon to get a curse from Poseidon, and then something on the cast, Hestia, Demeter, Aphrodite. Honestly, anything works. There's like so many options for the second curse. And again, you don't need magic. You don't need to use your Omega cast attack or special ever. You can try to use the Momus effect where you actually can get healed up to 50% health, even through the negative healing vow. But I mean, I never even bothered and I still had a pretty easy time. So yeah, this is definitely my #1 recommendation for a build for 32 Fear if you just want to get it done. All right, next up we have Aspect of Pan for the Daggers. You get a bunch of additional Omega special blades, so you can just deliver tons of damage really quickly, and you can have it home in on enemies by throwing your cast under them first. So yeah, you can get a ton of damage with this aspect, but I did have a tougher time with this one versus the staff. I was able to beat it a couple of times already anyway, but nevertheless, it is definitely not as easy, I would say. I tried out a slightly different fear setup for this one just to kind of experience some things differently here. Like I did a longer deadline, and then I made enemies a little bit chunkier, just 10% more. I have double Rebuke on, and I had to take off Vow of Panic, which reduces our current magic because we need to use our Omega special, right? So you kind of have to turn that off. It was kind of touch and go, but I didn't actually end up losing a Death Defiance until the Chronos fight, so possibly not that bad. But yeah, the strategy is essentially quite similar, I'm afraid. Get Poseidon on the special and kind of just spam out the Omega special. The best hammers are probably going to be Boundless Flurry, Hook Knives, and there's a couple other ones that are okay, like Dancing Knives and Spiral Knives is kind of okay here too. There's actually quite a few good hammers for this one, which is nice versus something like Momus Staff, where there's kind of just one good hammer, but you don't necessarily have to have that hammer to win that run, by the way. But yeah, for the Pan Dagger run here, you're going to need good magic regeneration, and nothing is more broken than Born Gain from Hera. It's just a crazy amount of magic really quickly. You can take it at common, it's no big deal. Because we do need our magic, you got to be much more careful of Vow of Arrogance here to make sure you're not priming too much and taking too high of rarity boons if possible. And also that probably means you want to avoid that on your Arcana setup. Don't get higher rarity boons from that. So let's talk about a few general things really quickly here, namely about Keepsakes. You probably want to start each run like you would in most others, which is with a God Keepsake to force a certain God that you know would suit well on your attack, special cast, whatever you're actually seeking there. However, if you're running Vow of Bitterness, that's going to make that a lot harder, unfortunately. So yeah, that definitely is a problem for that. But yeah, you probably want to start with like Poseidon's Keepsake if you're going to follow this at all. After that, it's not really wrong just to throw on Morose's Pin, because that's a pretty strong defensive. Scaly's Luckier Tooth is pretty good too, but it's not as good if you still have all of your Death Defiances, because it doesn't do anything until you've used all your Death Defiances. So the pin kind of just works a little bit better, I think, nowadays. I think it's a slightly improved version of it, essentially. A lot of times I'll throw on Chaos's Keepsake for the second zone here, because, I mean, a random epic Chaos boon can be incredibly strong. It could be totally useless, though, too, right? But there's a lot of magic-related ones, so it's a particularly good in something like the Aspect of Pan run here, whereas it's probably not as big of a deal with Momus. You could probably skip it and go right to the pin and try to stay a little bit more safe if you wanted. Oh yeah, and you do keep the boon from Chaos after you take the pin off, by the way, so yeah, it's really good. And that is all. I know we only cover 2 weapons, but I don't want to make you think that this is going to be just as easy with all the weapons. I think these are the 2 strongest ones to go out there with if you're just trying to beat 32 Fear for the first time. But if you got questions, make sure you let me know in the comments if you got questions about the other weapons, or if you have your own suggestions for builds with the other weapons. Maybe I'd love to hear it, what has worked for you if you've completed 32 Fear or 16 Fear or whatever, just let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like, comment, subscribe if you want a lot more Hades 2 content. I would appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video.